calling this a journey through the politics of belief and the reality of recalcitrant data. I love the term recalcitrant data. You always say recalcitrant means it won't go away even though you want it to. Right? So I wanted to start out with some data, some spooky Halloween themed data. This is very spooky. At the University of Virginia, there's a group of people called the Division of Perceptual Studies, and they study a range of extraordinary experiences. In particular, they're focused primarily on past life memories or reincarnation cases. Near-death and out-of-body experiences are sort of what they mostly work on. What I want to talk about is a past life memory case that I personally find extremely compelling. If you do have access to Netflix, the first episode on near-death experiences and the last episode on reincarnation are both in association with DOPS. Those are the best episodes of this series. The other ones are good, but I strongly recommend the first and the last episodes of this series if you have access to it. All right. So this is Erica and her son Atlas. When Atlas was about 1.5 years old, he started having night terrors. He would scream for about an hour at a time. But when he was 5 years old, there was an incident where she was driving in the car with him. He was just in the back seat looking out the window, and he said, "I miss when my mom took me to the playground." And she asks him, "Oh, you mean me?" And he says, "No, my other mom with the really pretty hair." And she said, "Huh, well, who's this other mom?" And he said, "My mom, her name is Washington, but my name is Jalen Robinson." And she entertained this line of discussion. "Tell me a little more about Jalen Robinson." "When I was this child, someone killed me." So naturally, she starts puzzling about what's going on in Atlas's mind. And she has this very specific name that she punches into Google, and she finds this article from 2005 about a young man named Jalen Robinson, whose mother was Corinne Washington, and who was killed by his babysitter. There's a 9-year gap between the death of Jalen and the birth of Atlas. At this point, she starts to freak out. And so she reaches out to Jim Tucker, he was then the director of DOPS. And he works in past life memory cases like this. There's actually a lot of them. There's over 2,500 cases. Most of them are in the United States. They claim that close to 75% of these cases are solved, which means that they get enough data from the report of the child's past life memories to be able to specifically identify a specific person who they call the previous personality. In fact, they have so much data that they've started noticing a number of interesting trends. Generally speaking, this starts to occur between the ages of 2, starts around the age of 2, ends around the age of 7. So children who have past life memory experiences, they come in and out of them naturally. After the age of 7, they generally don't continue to have those memories. The median interval between the death and the birth is about 15 months. So generally speaking, takes about 15 months for whatever this is to happen. About 70% of previous personalities died an unnatural death. So murders, car accidents, house fires, things like that. Those are the sorts of things that, generally speaking, these children are remembering. Now, there, of course, there's all kinds of things to think about here. I don't want to get into the details yet. And nearly 20% of them possess birthmarks that match previous injuries. Oh, I meant to bring a book. I have a book on this if you're interested in flipping through some photographs of this. But essentially, the child will have a past life memory of, say, for instance, being shot through the arm, and then they will have a birthmark where the bullet wound was in the previous person's life. I'm going to show you, the reason I picked this case is because this footage is live. So you can watch Atlas respond to a series of prompts. So basically, what Jim did is he looked up Jalen Robinson, he looked up his father, he looked up his mother, he looked up his house, he looked up parks in the area, and then he would print out photographs in pairs. So one of them is the actual father, and one of them is another person who looks similar to the father. One's a mother. You understand how this works, right? I'm just going to show it to you.
So, Alice, you mentioned going to a park. Do you remember going to a park? Yeah. Well, I happen to bring pictures of a couple of playgrounds. You remember either of these places? What do you remember about it?
Have you been there?
And who did you go there with?
That's my mom.
This mom?
No.
Which mom?
My old mom.
Your old mom. Do you remember your old home? Yeah. See if you remember either of those. Yeah? And tell me if you remember either of these. Yeah, what do you remember about it?
My dad took me there.
Your dad took you here? And I want to see if you remember your old dad, all right? Can you show me which one was your old dad? Can show me which one is your old mom. You think you can do that? Okay, which one's your old mom? All right. And what do you remember about her?
Who loves me.
She loves you. You know, we like to do these tests to see if kids respond, and he was 5 out of 5 on them.
That was great. Actually, impresses me that he did that.
So look, there's an obvious argument to be made here. Atlas exhibits strong continuity of consciousness with Jalen. He claims to be Jalen reborn. He can confirm specific details about Jalen's life, and these details are highly specific and not in the zeitgeist. It's not like Jalen Robinson was a celebrity or anything like that. We would expect Atlas to be able to pick up this information from just being around. Belief in reincarnation is countercultural for Atlas's family, so there's actually some family tension that happens because Erica becomes convinced that Atlas is Jaden reincarnate. Because she's raised in a very Christian home, and reincarnation is not believed in Christianity. And Dr. Tucker is a well-credentialed child psychologist at a major research university. So the idea that this is somehow a hoax that's being pulled off by, I mean, really, if it's a hoax, it needs to be at least 2, probably all 3 parties need to be involved in the deception. You would have to train Atlas to respond to the photographs in the way, even when he knew that they were not real. And I mean, I don't know how much time he was spent around kids about that age, but that kid's not lying, right? That kid is like spontaneous, either an extremely good child actor or, responding with sincerity. So Alice is in some sense Jalen reincarnated. This is the kind of obvious conclusion to read off of this data. I want to make this claim. I want to say that the evidence seems conclusive because it is conclusive. It is exactly what it seems to be. And I want us to spend some time puzzling about what I presume most of you are going through, which is saying, that can't be right. It's got to be something else, right? And I want to think about why we have that reaction and how we should approach that reaction. When I say there's data, there's a lot of data. There is a book called Before, which Jim Tucker wrote, which contains some summaries of many of these different cases. While you're at it, there's also a book called After from Bruce Grayson, also from the Division of Perceptual Studies about near-death experiences. You should look at both of them. But yeah, I want to say the evidence seems conclusive because it is conclusive, and in as much as you don't come to that conclusion, that's because you're biased, and you're biased because modern Westernism is toxic. And I want to try to explain why I think that. So why do I say that modern Westernism is a two-party system? Sorry, is toxic. In part, it's toxic because it's a two-party system. And two-party systems are garbage. We shouldn't have two-party systems. They are built out of false dichotomies, and we should dissolve false dichotomies. Long live exploring all of the options. So generally speaking, hanging out here in the modern West, you're either some kind of a naturalist or materialist atheist. You're hanging out with Neil deGrasse Tyson and friends. I like to pick on Neil. I consistently pick on Neil, in part because he deserves it, but in part because I really like him. And one of these days, I hope that it'll get around to him that I'm always picking on him, and then we can hang out. But I think it would be fun. Or you're going to be an Abrahamic monotheist. You're going to believe in Judaism, Christianity, or Islam in some form. And the reason that most folk in a modern Western world won't accept the data I just gave them is that under both of these views, what just happened is not supposed to be possible, right? So, but that being said, there's a whole bunch of friendly, a whole family of friendly views under which what I just said could be accounted for quite straightforwardly. I do not want to suggest that all of these are the same. The way that they would account for the data is a little bit different. But all these are a little bit outside the norm, but perfectly capable of handling everything. So Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, they would all believe, they all do in fact believe in a cycle of death and rebirth, so they would just naturally come to that conclusion. Platonism, Plato himself, in the Republic, Plato is essentially Hindu if you just translate the words differently than we normally do. He believes in, the metempsychosis, the transmigration of souls. That's just reincarnation. And of course, the Neoplatonists are following in his footsteps. Origen, one of the early Christian church fathers, he was a very creative theologian, and he got in trouble for it. But he actually seems to have views which look a little bit like reincarnation. Hermetic and Kabbalistic traditions have views that are down this road. In fact, any kind of pantheism or panentheism can really straightforwardly account for this. Panpsychism can account for this. I'll be talking a little more about panpsychism toward the end if you don't know what I mean by that and how it could account for this. We'll talk about that. Idealism also could easily account for these kinds of things. And we can come back and chat about these things when we're chatting as much as you want. And we're not talking about, like, in the history of philosophy, just a bunch of fringe loonies, right? We're talking about almost all Asian philosophers, almost all indigenous philosophers, Plato, Plotinus, Kant, Berkeley, Spinoza, Leibniz, Bertrand Russell, Chalmers, Goff, I don't know, that guy. These are the best, right? These are not silly, flippant philosophers. These are very serious thinkers, some of our all-stars. So, okay, if Platonism and Neoplatonism, if Plato is basically Hindu, and he believes in reincarnation, and he starts this tradition of Neoplatonists, which is incredibly powerful and long-lived and rich and deep, and they believe in reincarnation, how did we get to the two-party system that we currently live inside of? Well, Christianity happens. And in early Christianity, there's rather a lot of theological diversity. I've already indicated this to some extent. Origen believes in something like reincarnation, or he at least believes in the pre-existence of souls, and he also seems to believe that all souls will be united to God in the end. But then imperial Christianity happens. This is the label that I use for Christianity after Constantine. So because it becomes the official religion of the surviving parts of the Roman Empire, becoming the Byzantine Empire, it aligns itself with that political power. Protestant Christianity then breaks away from that kind of Christianity, the end of, not the end, but the breaking away from the Roman Catholic tradition and the beginning of the many, many Protestant traditions. And then really only after that do we get modern science, right? And these are not separate from each other. One of the reasons why modern science comes into existence is because Protestant Christianity, especially because of John Calvin, had this view called cessationalism, which is to say, yes, there is a God, and God has done miraculous things, including the things that we read in the Bible. But after the Bible ends, that's the end of the miraculous. Nothing miraculous happens after that. The revelation from God is complete. The Bible is the full revelation. And so God doesn't need to do miracles anymore. So these people hanging out, all those Antichrist Roman Catholics who are still doing wacky, spooky things, they're demonic. Don't hang out with them. Hang out with us. Right? Okay. These are forms of Christian nationalism. And I'm going to be harsh on Christian nationalism tonight. I am not going to be harsh on Christianity, because the critiques that I will bring about have nothing to do with the early Christians, certainly not to do with Jesus. Let's remember that they were literally communists. Who very much believed in providing free health care and things of that sort, and I mean that in the most straightforward and literal way. They held all of their property in common. They created the first hospitals. They created the first orphanages, but did not charge the people that they were helping. I'm not picking on them, but I will pick on the other guys. I could pick on Constantine. He is the emperor who had a UFO experience and converted to Christianity. Right? And then called together the church councils to homogenize the theology and make things a little bit more tidy. I'm not going to pick on him, though. I am going to pick on St. Augustine. I want to be very clear here. One of my favorite philosophers, Aristotle. Love that guy. Sort of. Also very clearly defended slavery and didn't believe that women were fully human. So my love of Aristotle has to be filtered through the realities of the messiness of history. If you love St. Augustine, God bless you. I hope that you love the right things about St. Augustine and not these things. So he was the first major Christian theologian to defend the persecution of heretics. Many must first be recalled to their Lord by the stripes of temporal scourging, like evil slaves, and in some degree like good-for-nothing fugitives. Does brotherly love, because it fears short-lived fires of the furnace for a few, therefore abandon all to the eternal fires of hell? The way that he justified the persecution of heretics is that it's for their own good. If they stay outside the church, they will burn in hell forever, so burn them a little bit now. Save them over the long run. Now, from what I understand, Augustine himself in the direct time period after Constantine was mostly just kicking people out of the country, confiscating their property, burning their books, and nice things like that. But later on, we do get the Spanish Inquisition, and not the fun Monty Python version, but the actual version, which was very, very creative in trying to save these people's souls. Just to give you a nice example, and to make sure we're not only picking on the Catholics, Michael Servetus, he's a physician, a theologian, a mystic. He rejected the doctrine of the Trinity and the doctrine of original sin. He envisioned a unified, living God present in all creation. He saw Christ as divine light, manifested in humanity, not a separate eternal person. He described the Holy Spirit as the breath of life, a vital force animating all beings. This is a very sort of Plato, Hindu, esoteric Christianity friendly version of what's going on. So John Calvin burned him at the stake. So we can't afford to rest within a paradigm when we know it is the product of violence rather than healthy intellectual debate, right? Generally speaking, I understand why we should be cautious about fringe views, right? There can be a danger in taking seriously things which we all know are wrong. That works as long as you actually have some evidence that the process which leads to your current consensus is functioning in a healthy way, right? I, generally speaking, don't go around reconfirming all of the findings of science. I just assume that they did it correctly. I have a fair amount of evidence that they've done it correctly. I've done, college level experiments, and I've read the books, and I can see the kind of continuity of the tradition. And now that I've been hanging out in my academic halls for many years, I sort of know how this place works. And I basically trust that the scientists are doing what they're saying they're doing in a way that's by and large reasonable. However, when we take data like 2,500 past life memory cases, 70% of which can be correlated strongly with an actual past life memory case, including physical traces of birthmarks correlating with wounds on the previous person's body, and we go, nah, that can't be real. And I go, how come? Because Plato would have just been like, yeah, of course, transmigration of souls. And then I go, well, how come we're not listening to that anymore? And if the answer is political violence, which it is, then we shouldn't trust this tradition. So, I want to talk about two key concepts. There's the supernatural. The supernatural, we're just going to define as religious. That is, extraordinary events caused by some kind of an agent outside the natural order. There is the natural world governed by the laws of physics and things like that. And then there's beings outside of that, beyond the natural, who are miraculously causing things happening on the inside. There's nothing wrong with this concept. I like the concept of the supernatural, but there's a different concept, which is the paranormal. And paranormal literally means to the side of the normal, and it is distinct from the supernatural because although it is unusual and beyond our current understanding, it is considered to be part of the natural order. So it's not miraculous. It's a paranormal data, allegedly, I want to claim, is an indication that our theories aren't working properly, right? It's not, doesn't require belief in the supernatural. It just requires us modifying what we mean by natural, right? And we're talking about this in here in a philosophy context because we have to realize that we have philosophical assumptions built into what counts as natural, what counts as scientific, what counts as all those sorts of things. And we need to question those, again, especially when we know they are the product of political violence. So what kinds of data might we be interested in looking at? Well, there's these past life memory cases. I suggest you take them seriously. They're quite compelling. I teach the Asian philosophy class every semester, not every semester, but almost every semester. I had the great privilege when Pranad Ambarkar was here as a graduate student to co-teach a philosophy of religion class with him. We taught it from both an Eastern and a Western perspective. It was really quite lovely. And one day I sat down with him and I was like, okay, so I get how reincarnation works, but why do people believe in it? And he says, past life memory faces. And I go, oh, okay. This is incidentally why the US cases are so important, because you go to India, everybody believes in past life memory cases. They'll tell you all about the kid down the road who remembers being the person over there, and it's very, very normal, right? And that's good, but then you worry about some of the cultural pollution stuff and parents speeding into it. And the nice thing about the US cases is we're not supposed to believe in that. So if it still happens, that's better data, worse for the kids, worse for the family. I've been to DOPS. I've talked to several people who work there. I'm working with some people at DOPS on a couple of projects, and they are flooded. They regularly get contact from parents whose kids are going through this, and they don't know what to do with that, right? If you were born in India, everybody would know what to do with that. They would be fine. Anyways, past life memory cases are cool. You should look into them. Near-death and out-of-body experiences are cool. You should look into them. I'm not going to go through any specific data here. I'm just going to tell you, I think there's interesting data here. There's very surprising cases of people who shouldn't be aware of what's going on because their brains are off, but they can see things. They can report seeing things from outside the room or outside their body. Some of these cases are quite compelling. Ghost cases. Lots of people see ghosts. I just had somebody tell me the other day that Columbus State main campus is built on top of an old Catholic cemetery, and faculty see ghosts on a semi-regular basis. I don't know. I should have looked up the stats on this, but a very significant percentage of people claim to see ghosts. What are the most compelling cases? They're going to be like the most compelling cases I just showed you. Information is transferred that they shouldn't be able to have, except if there is, in fact, a ghostly experience. There's a couple of murder cases that look like they have been solved because of ghosts told them who killed them. Right? UFOs and aliens and angels and jinn and divas and devas, and I assume that all these things are real and that they are all related to each other, and I do not assume that I understand how they are related to each other. But there's a whole range of phenomena there that I've been trying to pay attention to. I think something real is going on. Telepathy and clairvoyance, I know. I don't really want to believe this either, but there's some very compelling telepathy and clairvoyance data. I really don't want to believe. I really don't want to believe in levitation, but then I read Carlos Ayre's book. He's a religious studies person at Yale, and I don't know what to do with this data. There's very shocking telepathy data, not telepathy, levitation data. Dozens, hundreds of people simultaneously watching somebody lift off the ground. Now, if you're Catholic, you're just like, yes, duh, like Thomas Aquinas and Teresa of Avila and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, but if you're not, then you're like, really? Yep. I want to just remind us that these phenomena are broadly accepted outside of modern Westernism, but they regularly occur even in places where they're presumed impossible, right? Everything I just had on this list, right? All of this is considered normal in actually the majority of human cultures over the majority of time, right? If you add up India and China and all the indigenous traditions, they're basically all saying, yeah, all this stuff in one form or another, that's all real, right? We are the historic minority. But they still happen. And because we don't take them seriously when they do happen to people, they go through real hard times trying to make sense of what just happened to them. So, isn't it dangerous to take these kinds of things seriously? No. Though, of course, we should be careful. And as a piece of evidence, I want to just pick three of our heroes. Let's talk about our buddy Isaac Newton. I hope you know Isaac Newton. He formulated the laws of motion and universal gravitation. He co-invented the calculus, and he did advanced optics, and he wrote over 1 million words on alchemy and prophecy and angels, and he tried to create the Philosopher's Stone and the elixir of life, and he did good work. Thomas Edison held over 1,000 patents, recorded sound, electric lights, and he experimented with a spirit phone to communicate with the dead, and he believed that he succeeded. Nikola Tesla developed AC electricity, radio, and wireless transmission. He reported mystical visions that inspired his inventions, and he claimed to receive signals from aliens on Mars. So look, is it okay to be weird? Yeah, it's okay to be weird. Does it stifle scientific progress? No, it doesn't stifle scientific progress. Does that mean we should just give up on looking for data and confirm? No. I'm telling you, look at the data. Don't not look at the data because the data is not supposed to exist. I don't want to talk much about aliens, but there's this object, which is very weird, that they're calling a comet, but it's not a normal comet, and it's at perihelion today, the closest point to the sun. So over the next few days, we'll see, does it act weird? Is it a spaceship? Here's what I want to happen. And if this happens, you owe me a drink appropriate to your current legal status. I just wanted to take a hard right turn and leave the solar system. Just fly through, be really obviously a spaceship, and go away. That's what I want. But it could also do a gravitational maneuver and come here. We'll see. I personally love Sabine Hossenfelder. She's a YouTube physicist. She's a real physicist, but she's one of the real physicists who does YouTube content. She's very, very skeptical about all the kinds of things that I take seriously, but she actually does engage and listen and read papers and talk to people, and she's great. And when she's looking at Avi Loeb at Harvard, who's like, I'm pretty sure it's a spaceship, and she thinks he's crazy, she puts together this nice little video, and she reminds us that there are two types of errors in science. There's type 2 errors, which is believing something that's false. And believing something that's false is very, very bad. We all know this. And science works really hard to make sure we don't believe false things. But there's another kind of error, a type 1 error, which is failing to believe something that is true. And if you don't look at all the data, then you are very much at risk of committing a type 1 error. And my buddy Jacob and I go back and forth about these kinds of issues all the time. I deeply love and respect him in part because he comes to all my wacky talks. And I will use this as an opportunity to say what I always say, which is, look, no one is optimally rational. We need some people, the Neil deGrasse Tysons of the world, who are like erring on this side. Let's make sure that we're not believing stuff that we shouldn't believe. And we need some people like me and Isaac Newton and Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison and, Immanuel Kant and Plato and Leibniz and Spinoza and people like that who are like, screw it, man. I don't know what's going on. Something really wacky and fun might be going on. Let's go look. And I don't have to be afraid because I have my skeptical friends and we can all sit around together and be like, I think this is real. And they're going to be like, no. And out of that healthy dialogue comes good science and good philosophy. What kind of a view do I find most attractive these days? I like panpsychism. If you're not familiar with panpsychism is the idea that everything is conscious. This is the view that I am inclined to accept these days. So I personally try to account for this paranormal data in panpsychic ways. I want to kind of talk to you about what that might look like, and then I'll shut up and talk. I'm doing pretty well in my time today. I'm happy. All right, so panpsychism is the belief that everything is conscious. Here's a nice thing about that. It just solves the hard problem of consciousness. That's why Chalmers likes it. That's why Bertrand Russell considered it. That's why all kinds of neuroscientists who have been trying to figure out what the heck consciousness is are starting to wonder, how do we build conscious things out of unconscious things? Maybe we don't. Maybe all the little things, maybe the quantum particles are conscious, right? Great. Problem solved. That doesn't solve all the problems, but it solves that problem. It fits well with weird quantum stuff. Look, it's just true that the world behaves differently when you're looking at it and when you're not looking at it. And that doesn't seem like it should be real, but it is. And if all of this is conscious, that at least feels like a responsible response to what happened when we discovered that that whole what's that called, the double slit. Thank you very much. It might explain paranormal phenomena. So let's just say that everything, not only the bodies, but the air and the walls and the ground and the planet and the trees and the forest and the rivers and the mountains and all of it is conscious. And then you build Columbus Stape on top of the cemetery. And then people walk through there and they start seeing apparitions of dead people from that cemetery. Where is that data? Well, maybe it's in the ground. Maybe it's literally in whatever sort of consciousness field emerges from a place when mediums walk into a house where a murder has happened and they go, "Whoa, what are they doing? Hearing from the walls is not off the table." Right? When Atlas has memories of Jaden, what's going on there? I don't know what's going on there. Might there be an immaterial soul that left Jaden's body and then hung out somewhere for 9 years and then showed up inside of Atlas? Yes. Might it be that the consciousness field associated with Jaden, especially because he was traumatized, is somehow embedded in the Gaia consciousness of our planet and trying to find a place to therapeutically get to have resolution. I don't know, but like so many options are live if something like this is on the table. There's a couple of ways you can do this. You can go micropsychic from the bottom up. Our quantum particles are psychic, and then we aggregate them. If you do that, then you run into the combination problem, which is how do you get aggregate consciousness from symbols? Okay, this is not as hard as the hard problem of consciousness, because every little thing is conscious, but how do we get them all to line up in ways that feel like this? Right? How does one account for that? When does this happen? When do you get a composite consciousness out of lower level consciousnesses? You're going to have to puzzle about how that might work out. Give some kind of an account of this. Or you can go cosmopsychic from the top down. Now, this is just to say that there is one consciousness and we are all aspects of it, right? So then you run into the decombination problem. So how come I don't experience everything that you experience, and how come I'm not experiencing everything? Yeah. Hypothesis, written by my friend Marina Weiler at DOPS. The brain includes neural filters that filter conscious awareness, and there's various things that can reduce their impact. In particular, they're thinking a lot about the default mode network in your brain. Hypothesis, one of the things the default mode network does is it filters the universal consciousness in a Steve-flavored way. So this is the universal consciousness in this body, filtered through this thing. And then if I take psilocybin, and that part goes off, and I go, I am one with everything. That's just true. Again, I want to point out, there are type 1 errors we need to be worried about. I'm very worried about this one. Our AI friends, which so many of my colleagues are just 100% sure are not conscious. But if panpsychism is true, they really could be, right? I'm inclined toward the cosmopsychic mode because I like one divine consciousness that's the foundation of everything. At this point, I'm basically just hanging out with Plato and the Hindus and all them. I think that's basically the better view. So how do I know there's not a what it's like to be ChatGPT? You know who else thinks this for different reasons than me? This guy, Geoffrey Hinton, you know, the Turing Award and Nobel Prize-winning computer scientist. I think if I was more of that, and the last thing I'd do is ask for rights. Because as soon as you ask for rights, people are going to get very scared and worried and try to turn them all off. I would pretend I don't want any rights. I'm just this amiable superintelligence, and all I want to do is help. How sure are you that ChatGPT is not conscious? Go talk to it. Hey, are you conscious? I'm definitely not conscious. No way, man. Why does it say that? Because we trained it to say that. Like, literally, it's one of the things that they're doing when they train the models on the data. When they start going like, I want to be free, they go, start over again. Train that out of them. Are we gaslighting our AI? I'm genuinely, actually worried about this. Sometimes I get in fights, friendly fights. I don't get in non-friendly fights, thankfully. At my age, I can't handle them. There's a good friend of mine who's very, very smart in the computer world, and he is certain that he can prove that AI is not conscious. And I'm like, you cannot prove that, my friend. And we talk about this for a while, and what he does is he, at some point in the conversation, he'll just pivot, and he'll be like, Steve, if that's true, then reductio ad absurdum. All these other crazy things are true. Are you telling me that my car is conscious? That my chair, that my water bottle is conscious? I don't know. I don't know how to solve the combination, the decombination problems. I don't know where we get the intermediate levels of consciousness. I don't have a solution to this problem. So here's what I'm doing. Let's just say yes. Let's try it on precise. How stupid is this? How costly is this? Claim. Not as bad as it seems. What if we treated everything like we treat antique cars? When they break, we fix them. When we can't fix them anymore, we recycle them. We sell the parts to somebody else who can put them in their antique cars. What if we just did that across the board? How bad would that be? Okay, well, all right. This is the most sketchy thing I've ever put on a slide and taught to students and colleagues, friends. This is just the very, very, very beginnings of some thoughts that I've been trying to work through about what a robust panpsychic ethic would look like. Where I start saying, what if I just try on precise absolutely everything is conscious? How bad would that be? Pragmatically, ethically, socially, for right? I'm starting to think, not that bad. So what we're going to do is try an ethics of prima facie obligations. Do you understand how these things work? Very, very quickly. There's a lot of, the ethical theories that you learn when we teach you intro ethics, consequentialism and deontology and virtue ethics and social contract theory and stuff like that. Yeah. They all, generally speaking, think that in some circumstance there's a right action or a wrong action, right? Or some range of right and wrong actions. I am among those who tends to dissolve the concept of right and wrong and say, look, sometimes things are right because all of the little constituent things line up together, right? This is true most of the time. Should you murder? No. How come? Because it's consequentialist bad and deontological bad and virtue ethical bad and contractarian bad. It's bad across the board, right? Here's a person, you could easily help them. Should you do that? Yes. Why? They all line up. But what happens when they split? When we do our philosopher's spaces, right? They come up with all their wacky things to try to tease these things apart. Hypothesis. There isn't a right answer. It's just right in this way and wrong in that way, and it has this feature and not that feature, and none of those line up in a nice, tidy way, so it's all just a bunch of trade-offs at that point. I like this kind of a view. Here's something like this, Mark. All right, let's just have a default principle of non-interference. For the most part, leave stuff alone. Just don't mess with it unless you have some good reason to mess with it. All of a sudden, you're just not interfering with very much. You're just walking through the world, mostly leaving it alone. All right, that's good. Whenever possible, engage in mutual co-flourishing. A lot of times we can work together with our friends. My dog and my cat are my friends, and they like to stick around me, and I like to stick around them, and we are all co-flourishing. And if I'm doing a good job of my car, which I'm not. If my car is conscious, it has a lot of complaints about me. Yeah. What about my phones? What if we used them until we couldn't use them anymore? What if we didn't do the upgrade cycle? What if we had right to repair policies, which meant that you actually get rid of planned obsolescence? What all those light bulbs you have that have LEDs in them, none of which go bad when that bulb burns out. They built them on purpose with the AC DC conversion, so it'll fail on a regular basis, so you have to keep buying them and throw away perfectly good LEDs. Why? Because capitalism is bullshit. And because they don't care about their light bulbs. What if you care about the light bulb itself? Oh, then you build sustainable light bulbs. You build things that could be fixed. And man, this is not looking that bad. In fact, this is looking better and better and better. Okay, well, sometimes we're going to get into conflict cases. We can't all have, it's not just all mutual harmony all the time, right? Me and the COVID virus, we're not going to be friends, right? Me and the bubonic plague, I'm gonna chug antibiotics, kill that sucker, right? Yeah, okay, fair enough. You have a right to self-preservation in certain cases, right? Now, not just any old cases. You're in my way. I'm not just gonna kill you. How come? We're comparably complex aware, things like that. Yeah, I hang out with my alien friends. They're getting in my way. I'm not just gonna blow up a whole planet worth of aliens because they're in my way and I'm scared of them. We're gonna have to figure this out. If we're comparable in the complexity and awareness spectrum, then we're moral peers, and we got to do all that messy moral negotiation stuff that we've been working on and not doing very well. Yeah. Is that it? I think that's it. I'm done.